Can you imagine paying 16 days' wages for 100 of these? That's why they reused nails when they crucified people, right? They were a lot bigger than this, and they were real expensive. So they pulled them out and reused them. For those of you who just came in, if you haven't seen the coins yet, this is it. I'm not bringing them back anymore. I'm tired. So got silver Roman denarii from Augustus all the way through the end of the New Testament, Trajan. So 13, I guess, of those denarii. In the other case are all the coins of the Hasmoneans, everybody who ruled Judea and Judea, all the way up from Simon Hyrcanus, the Hasmonean, all the way through Vespasian, essentially as a representation of the end of the Jewish war, okay, when Jerusalem and the temple fell in 87. I'm going to go ahead and pass around. I don't know if all of you have seen that. If you don't mind passing that around, these are Tyrian shekels. These are very rare. I've mentioned this 2, 3, 73 times. I'm not sure. Tyrian shekels are what was the temple tax. A half shekel was required of all Jewish males, okay, annually. And a full shekel you could pay for 2 Jewish males with a full shekel coin, almost, except you had to pay the koban. So there was a tax upon the tax. I also have a bunch of coins up here. Tetradrachms, pretty big coin, silver coin, all the way down to obols, which, right there's an obol, a little tiny Greek coin, and pretty much everything in between. I have lots of lepton up here, Jewish widows' mites, also known as lepta. I've got denarii up here. I've got just about everything. So anyway, peruse through those if you'd like. Oh, the dolphin. Yeah, I have an old Greek coin, about 400 BC. Looks like a dolphin to some of us. To others, not so much. All right. So anyway, let's continue on with our discussion of money. All right. So last week we covered Jewish money, lepton, all the way up through shekels, all the way up to the Jewish talent, and even the heavy talent, okay? We covered Greek money. A bunch of pieces of Greek money, a bunch of different Greek standards. Greek money is very complex. Today we're going to cover Roman money, and then we'll talk about how we convert between the different kinds of money from one to the other. And we'll convert ancient money into U.S. money, and that'll be a fun little exercise in mathematics. So stay tuned for that. I'm excited. I might be the only one that's excited, but we're going to go through it. We can get through it, you and I, together. Okay. All right, so Roman money overview. The smallest Roman piece of money was an unkia, or a quadrans was next, was 1/4 of an as, okay? And we're going to see examples of quadrans in the Bible. What's in bold are things that I'm going to cover a little bit more. Some of these other pieces of money are just kind of like there. But I think it'd be kind of neat to actually have another collection, another frame of money that collects all the different Roman pieces of money, all the way from an unkia all the way up through a gold Denarius. That would be cool. By the way, if I ever start doing that and I disappear, look in my backyard for a mound of dirt that's like, disturbed mound of dirt, because I probably will have been shot by my wife. So that might be the only money I collect right there. I don't know. Where was I going with all this? All right. So we have the different pieces of money in bold that we're going to talk about. Quadrans, as is the base unit, worth 1/10 of a denarius during the early republic, and worth 1/16 of a denarius during the early empire. Deponius, Tertius, Quinarius. Denarius was the unofficial base unit. Okay, again, that whole frame over there are silver denarii of varying levels of silver. We'll talk about debasement of coinage as we go along. Okay, so early on coinage was very high content silver. As time went on, Nero debased it, from 4 grams down to 3.8 grams for denarius. All the way to the last denarii in there was a fairly debased coin by the time Vespasian came along. All right, we'll talk about that. We'll get to it. And then we have the Aureus. It's 25 denarii. It's a gold coin. The Aureus is a gold coin. I don't have any of those. If any of you are looking for me for a Christmas present, I would love to have a collection of all the emperors from Augustus through Trajan as gold auri. That'd be cool. So write that on your list if you're looking for something for me to get. All right, that will be a really cheap present. All right, let's move along. So we'll start out with the quadrans and the as. Okay, now the unkia was smaller than the quadrans, but we'll start with the quadrans. A quarter of an as, also equal to 2 Jewish lepta. Now, a lot of this conversion between money we know from, guess what? The Bible. That's kind of cool. Okay? I'll show you a passage on that shows you this particular conversion here in just a minute. Quadrans or bronze is translated as a farthing in the Bible in Matthew, also known as quadrantes. And in Matthew 12:42, it says, a poor widow came, put in 2 small copper coins, lepta. Okay, that's a Jewish term. All right. Which is equal to a penny. That's what the King James says, but it's equal to a quadrans. Okay? There's our first conversion we're going to talk about in the Bible today. 2 lepta is equal to a quadrans. Jewish money to Roman money. Okay? If that's the only piece of information we had, we could solve all the other pieces of data we need for converting Jewish to Roman money. But we got several others as we'll go along. We'll see. So we see conversions of between money pieces, between Jewish, Greek, and Roman, and we'll see conversions, this is some analysis that I've done, we'll see conversion of time from Roman time, what was a Roman minute worth, what was a Roman hour worth, to what our minute and hours are worth today. Okay? I will go through my analysis of that, and you can either take it or leave it, okay? But no one else has done this analysis that I'm aware of, okay? All right. So the as was the base unit of Roman money. The plural of as is ases, also known as the Syrian, a rather large and cumbersome coin. And we see that in Matthew and Luke, we see a couple of examples. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a Syrian, or not 5 sparrows sold for 2 Syrian. The King James translate those as pennies, okay? Now, they did, in a lot of cases, what some of the translations do today. When they say 100 denarii, you'll read a lot of the translations. We talked about this 2 weeks ago, where 100 denarii is translated a few dollars in places, right? We talked about how that is just not the case anymore because of our inflation, okay? We saw that one translation translated 100 denarii as a few $1,000s. That is a correct translation. If you're going to translate to U.S. money, that is a correct translation. The problem is, this book right here is out of date already, because I converted money pieces to U.S. money in here in 2016. That was 9 years ago. Our money ain't worth what it used to be, right? Our U.S. money is only worth 3% of what it used to be back when the Federal Reserve was created. So when we see translations that were created in the 1800s, late 1800s, and it says that 100 denarii is worth $1, a few dollars, that's pretty close. If you go to a current translation, though, in our thinking today, if you read 100 denarii as a few dollars, you're missing the point. Now, I know it's a parable, so it's a comparison of $2.6 billion we talked about last week compared to $4,300, okay? So it's a huge amount to a small amount, but it's not a few dollars, it's a few $1,000s, more than likely. Okay, all right. I'm getting ahead of myself or behind myself or something. All right, next up, the denarius. Okay, that's what's in the silver denarii over there in the right-hand frame, I guess. All right, there's 10 ases during the Little Republic, 16 ases during the early empire. Silver, the de facto base unit of Roman money. The plural of denarius is denarii. Okay, called a penny in the King James Version, not like our pennies today. Okay, this penny in the King James time was worth a day's worth of work. Okay, because a denarius was paid for a Roman's day of work. Approximately equal to a Greek dram, standard day's wage for unskilled labor. We read in Matthew 22. Earliest specimens from 211 BC, minted till 296, and their silver content really was debased quite a bit. They were probably about 2%, 1 or 2% silver by then. The Roman secretly required the denarius for tribute payments to the emperor. All right. Now, the denarius is termed from we derive the size of the nails we use. Okay. Anybody familiar with 16 penny nails? Those are really 16 denarius nails, okay? If you look at a nail today, you can get a 1 penny nail, a 2 penny nail, a 4 penny nail, et cetera, all the way up to a 6. Well, you go beyond 16. I don't think I have any bigger than 16. That is a 16 penny nail, a 16 denarius nail, okay? That is left over from the English way of talking about things. When they talked about penny, they were talking about denarius. Remember, denarius and penny were equivalent in King James English time. 16 penny nail, 16 denarius nail. I don't know where the other smaller nail is. We have lost it. But anyway, you go up and down from that 16 penny, 20 penny, whatever, all the way down to 1 penny nail, I guess. All right. This is a 2 penny nail, I think. So you see the difference between a 16 penny and a 2 penny nail. All right. That is the term Denarius. You really should call these a 16 denarius nail. So we're using King James English because of that. The cost in ancient times most likely was 16 denarii for 100 of these. Can you imagine paying 16 days' wages for 100 of these? And that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. Couple things. That's why they reused nails when they crucified people, right? They were a lot bigger than this, and they were real expensive. So they pulled them out and reused them. So it's real hard to go and compare things to things, ancient things to current things, okay? If I look at ancient nails, they were real expensive compared to current day nails. I can buy 1 billion of these for $1 or whatever, all right? It's real hard to do. For some things, there are some things that are equivalent, more equivalent. A bundle of grapes back then and a bundle of grapes today. Grapes are pretty ubiquitous back then. Grapes are pretty easy to get today at Walmart, you know, my fellow Walmart shoppers. All right. So you got to be careful when you talk about what something cost back then to what something costs today. What is the value of somebody's time? Well, that's pretty close to an unskilled laborer back then compared to an unskilled laborer today. Someone working in a vineyard back then, someone working at McDonald's, say today, okay? An unskilled labor being based on the minimum wage. And that's going to get into my conversation a little bit later on. All right. So let that sink in. 16 days of wages for 100 nails. That's a lot. The denarius in the Bible, we have lots of examples. Matthew 18, the parable of the servant owing 10,000 talents, $2.6 billion compared to $4,300. Okay. Again, big versus little. The parable of the laborers in the vineyard, those who worked an hour got the same pay as those who worked all day. They got a denarius. Matthew 22, Mark 12, Luke 20. The Pharisees and the Herodians were trying to trick Jesus, and they asked him if it was lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not. He says, bring me a coin. Okay, now notice there's two people coming and trying to trick Jesus, the Pharisees and the Herodians. So no matter how Jesus answered, he was going to be in trouble. Yes, it's good to pay taxes, or no, it's not good to pay taxes. He was going to tick one of those people, one of those groups of people off. Okay, so he said, bring me a coin. So they brought him a denarius. He says, whose picture on this? So I know that's a denarius because the Tyrian shekel doesn't have a picture of an emperor on there. Okay? A lepton doesn't have a picture of an emperor on there or a person on there. Okay? The thing that does have a picture of the emperor on there is a denarius. So that probably really is a denarius that he said to bring to him. He says, give to the emperor the things that are emperors, give to gods the things that are gods. Mark 6, 6 months' wages. The New King James says 200 denarii would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. And they're talking about feeding the people, the 5,000. I went and calculated out 200 denarii is pretty close to 6 months' wages. So Mary anointing Jesus, why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii? It's a lot of money. And the money given to the poor. A certain creditor to debtors, one owed 500 denarii, the other 50. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper. When he took the Samaritan, the good Samaritan, took it to the innkeeper. And the woman loses 1 coin, which is either a denarius or maybe a dram. And, she loses that coin. She sweeps the house looking for it. Okay, then Revelation 6:6, a quart of wheat for a day's pay, a denarius. All right, so we see lots of examples of denarius, the Roman de facto standard in the Bible. All right, next up, the Aureus and the talent. Again, if you want to get me a Christmas present, I love these gold auri. It'd be really nice to have. They were worth 25 denarii back then. Today, they're worth a lot more than that. Okay, the gold, the plural of Aureus is auri. Production began at the end of the Roman Republic. And we see maybe an example of this in Matthew 28 with the empty tomb. While they were going, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priest everything that happened. After the priest had assembled with the elders, they devised a plan to give a large sum of money to the soldiers. How do you do a large sum of money? You start out with a large coin that's worth a lot, right? So the large sum of money that we're going to give to the soldiers was probably perhaps auri, okay? Or maybe denarii. Just take a bunch more denarii to give to the soldiers to pay them off than it would auri, okay? The Roman talent is worth 6,000 denarii. That's a lot of money. Now, it's not a coin. The talent was a weight, not a coin. And that's true of Greek standards, Roman standards, and Jewish standards. All right. Inflation and debasement. The Roman silver denarii, as I mentioned before, contained about 4.5 grams of pure silver in 211 BC, and it started being debased. Nero reduced it from 4 to 3.8, And by the time of 296, it was down about 2% silver. Okay. So if you go on the market today on eBay or wherever and buy some coins online, you typically, it depends on a couple of things. It depends on silver content, depends on rarity. Okay. More rarity than anything. But if everything else was equal, okay, you would spend more for an old denarii than you would a newer denarii because of the debasement of the silver. Okay. But again, rarity is the thing. All right. Debasement causes extreme inflation, as we know, allows the government to spend more than it has until it can't. The U.S. debt's $37 trillion. If we could only pay it with Zimbabwe money, this is a $50 trillion bill of Zimbabwe money. They would have to carry wheelbarrows of money to go buy a loaf of bread back in the day. And I think they've converted actually using U.S. dollars now, is my understanding. I haven't checked lately. But anyway, that's kind of cool. If we could just use this kind of money to pay off our debt, that would be excellent. But we're not going to do that yet. Okay? So our dollar, as I mentioned, is only worth 3% of what it was when the Federal Reserve was created. So 100 denarii back then would have been about $130. So when the Bible says a few dollars for translations that are really old, that's probably an okay translation. All right, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So how do we wrap our modern heads around this? So we see, and I'm going to show you some more examples in a minute of different conversions that are in the New Testament between different Jewish, Greek, Roman pieces of money. So we can go back and forth between pieces of money pretty easy. And that is something Jews had to do really well, or all ancient peoples had to do really well back then. If somebody gave them a denarii, they had to know that, well, that's worth a quarter of a shekel. Okay. I mean, they just knew that. Said, okay, well, I'll give you a pigeon or whatever. All right. Give me 8 denarii. I'll give you a cucumber. Well, I'll show you that in just a minute. That's an expensive cucumber. 8 days of wages for a cucumber. Whew. I like cucumbers. I don't like them that much. I digress and I get ahead of myself. All right. So how do we wrap our heads around this? Of course, there's a calculator out there that y'all have available, testamentpress.com. And I'm going to show you the math behind writing that calculator. Okay. And you'll understand when you put a number into that calculator, all these other values populate, and you'll see the mathematics behind that as we go. All right. So we have to do conversion of money systems, which we got down pretty well. We must do conversions among time systems, which is a little more complex. We must equate money and work. Time is money. I just came up with that. That's pretty good, isn't it? Pretty impressive. We must compare ancient work days to hours. We must compare ancient work years to hours. Now, by this time, they had the Julian calendar, which is really similar to the Gregorian calendar. It's just got some leap stuff that's different. Okay, we talked about that in week 1 or 2 or 3. So everybody remember that? Okay, got some noddings. Okay, we talked about that. So the Julian calendar was very similar to the Gregorian calendar that we're under. We're under kind of a modified Gregorian calendar. Okay, but so we must equate our work to their work the best we can. Okay. And we will look at unskilled labor as that equation. We must understand the mix of cultures from their point of view. The conversions would have to be done basically on the fly by ancient peoples, converting all kinds of Jewish, Roman money, different kinds of Jewish money based on when something was minted, that kind of thing. You know, you got all the Herodians, you got the prefects and procurators, all the lepta and the pruta and all those things that were minted. So they had to understand all that just on the fly, be able to convert all this kind of money in their head. All right. Jews would have been just as comfortable with accepting a Roman denarius for a wage as they would have been a Jewish shekel. Okay, if we can work through all this, then we can get a good idea of how much ancient money was worth to us today. Hang with me. The value of work in exchange for money. Perhaps the best lesson I ever learned in all my engineering classes was the concept of unit canceling. This concept is more important than potty training to your children. Okay, it's the second most important concept to potty training to your children. Let me explain what I'm talking about here. If I want to convert between any kind of units, and I'm going to use the example here of converting from English to metric lengths. Okay? I have to know one value. The only value I ever learned in my whole engineering career was 2.54 centimeters per inch. That's ingrained in my head. I'll probably take that to my grave. Okay? I can use that one value to convert to anything in the metric length system, to anything in the to the English length system, everything in the metric area system to everything in the English area system, everything in the metric volume system to everything in the English volume system. One value, 2.54 centimeters per inch. And I'll show you how I do that. All right. This is an important concept. If you do any kind of mathematics at all, it's an important concept. All right. So you can easily convert from like times, like time to time, and weight to weight, energy, energy. And here's an example of that. To convert 6 inches to centimeters, okay? Again, I know that there's 2.54 centimeters per inch. So I start with 6 inches. Inches is in the numerator. You can put a 1 in the denominator if you'd like, okay, if that makes you feel better. So 6 inches per 1. And I want to cancel out the units. So I want inches on the denominator of the next term I use. Okay, does that make sense? So inches cancels out inches. Inches in the numerator cancels out inches in the denominator. I'm left with centimeters. I multiply through the value, 6 times 2.54, and I come up with 15.24 centimeters. Easy peasy. What if I want to go backwards? I still know that there are only 2.54 centimeters per inch. That's the only thing I've ever learned, okay? If I want to go backwards, I start out with 15.24 centimeters. I know that I've got to cancel out centimeters, so there's 2.54 centimeters in the denominator and inches in the numerator. Centimeters cancels out centimeters. I'm left with inches. I'm back to 6 inches. Easy peasy. You can do that for any kind of conversion on Earth. If you want to convert days to fortnights, 30 fortnights times 14 days per fortnight, fortnights cancels out, and we're left with days, 420 days. You can, if you want to convert to score, 4 score and how many years ago, this Abraham's thing, 20 years per score, or 20 something per score, okay? Very easy to convert that way. All right, very important concept to learn. Now, so that's just simple conversions, but you can also convert complex types, okay? If you convert a complex type, you start with a numerator-denominator pair. You can multiply through by anything that you want to as long as the ratio is always 1. 60 minutes per hour. 60 minutes is exactly equal to 1 hour. 60 minutes, minutes on top, hours on the bottom. If you need hours to cancel out, that's what you do. If you need minutes to cancel out, you put hours on the top and minutes on the bottom. So 1 hour per 60 minutes. All right? Everybody with me? Smile, nod. Some of you are engineers and smiling math people. Okay, all right, good. All right. So, we're getting more complicated. We want to know how much a lepton, the widow's mite, was worth in time. Okay? So, in other words, how long would the widow have to work for her lepton that she put in the treasury? All right. We know an equivalence is that a Roman worked 6 hours in a day. Okay? That was like before the late Republic and the Empire, and that changed a little bit. But 6 hours per denarius, okay? Those are equivalent. If I worked 6 hours as a Roman, I would be equivalently paid 1 denarii. All right. We know there's 4 denarius per shekel. And we'll get to these conversions between the systems here in a minute. I might be doing this a little bit out of order, okay? And we know there's 60 minutes per hour. Each one of these is an equivalence. I know 4 denarii is exactly equal to 1 shekel. I know that 60 minutes is exactly equal to 1 hour. So what I'm really multiplying through here is 1 times 1, okay, as far as the equivalences, okay? But then I see stuff cancel out. So what cancels out? So denarii cancel out, okay? What else cancels out? Hours cancel out. Hours and hours. So if I multiply through these values, 6 times 4 times 60, divided by 1 times 1 times 1, and with 1,440 minutes per shekel. All right. So that's 1,440 minutes per shekel. Now, how much is that worth? We know that 1 shekel is 512 lepton. We want stuff to cancel out. We cancel shekels here. We're left with minutes per lepton, 2.8 minutes per lepton. All right, easy peasy. But we don't know yet how much a lepton was worth. We know how much it was worth in time, but we don't know how much it was worth in money. So we've got to do some more calculations. Okay, so at this point, we determine how much it was worth in time. We don't know how much it was in money. How do we get from the ancient standard to our standard? And our baseline will be a standard day's wage for an unskilled laborer who is a free man. Matthew 22. And when he agreed with the laborers for a penny or a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. But we must understand what a value of a King James penny was, or a denarius, okay? So we will use this unskilled worker wage and compare it to the minimum wage today. So officially, the minimum wage today is still, I think, $7.25 an hour. Okay. I went and asked Perplexity, my AI, one of my AIs. I said, "What's unofficial minimum wage today? If I take all the minimum wage people get paid at McDonald's or Hardee's or whatever, what is that general minimum wage that people are paying?" I mean, I see on the billboard I can make $18 an hour or something at Arby's, whatever. I'm thinking I might go back to work. So what is the equivalent minimum wage? And Perplexity said, well, it's about $13.06 an hour. Okay, so we're going to use both these values as we go through our calculations. Now, so we're calculating the value of a lepton now in money. We know what it is in time. Now we're going to calculate what it is in money. So we calculated this before, 2.8 minutes per lepton. That's how long a widow has to work. She has to work 2.8 minutes to get a lepton. Okay, 1 hour is exactly equivalent to 60 minutes. $7.25 is exactly equivalent to 1 hour. Okay, pay per hour is minimum wage. And I end up with minutes canceling, leptons staying, hours canceling. I'm left with dollars here per lepton, 34 cents. That's based on the average. I'm sorry, that's based on the official minimum wage. If I base it on the de facto minimum wage, same calculation, 2.8 minutes per lepton, 1 hour, $13.06 per hour, I get 61 cents per lepton. Okay, a fraction of a penny is not what it used to be. That's what some of the translations say, right? The widow gave a fraction of a penny. Well, she didn't. She gave somewhere between 68 cents and $1.22 when she did that. Now, again, that's a gross approximation at best, but it turns out I think it's a pretty good approximation. I'll show you some other data that backs that up as we go. Now, let's look at some salaries and prices during Roman times. Again, you can't equate a bunch of things. You can't equate nails to nails. They don't equate at all. You can't equate cucumbers to cucumbers. They don't equate at all. You can equate maybe grapes to grapes, as an example. You can maybe equate the number of hours or the amount of money you pay someone to care for a sick loved one. We're very familiar with that. We've been paying someone to care for a sick loved one. Okay. So for daily wages, 1 denarius is a vineyard worker, 1 denarius a day. 2 denarii for looking after a sick man. If you calculate this out, it comes out to be about $87 a day based on our minimum wage. Okay. That's actually pretty close. Okay. We were paying $20 an hour for staying with a sick person. Okay. Pretty close. That's an equivalence of what people did then to what people do now. Okay. 2 denarii, daily wage for a scribe. How many scribes are there today? That's really hard to equate today. All right. 8 denarii daily wage for weaving a shawl. For goods and services, pomegranate, very ubiquitous over in Israel. People are always trying to sell us pomegranate smoothies and just pomegranate that were crushed on the street and poured in a glass and said, "Oh, okay." So we don't really have pomegranates here that are as ubiquitous as back then, but grapes are. So grapes, and I've got it referenced in the book where this comes from. I don't remember exactly, but somebody come up with all this, not me. But 8 pruta for a cluster of grapes. Okay, and that we're using my calculations of between $5.44 and $9.76, depending on our minimum wage. It turns out if I went to the Walmart website, and a cluster of grapes is about $6.46. Yeah, that's pretty close, pretty good, not too bad. All right, 16 pruta, a modest meal. 2 sparrows. We don't really go out and buy sparrows. Anybody go to Walmart and buy sparrows? I haven't seen the sparrow section there. Okay, so that's kind of hard. A loaf of bread, that's really hard to equate because we have such production capability today that they didn't have back then. So that's really hard to equate. Pigeon, we don't do that. Olive oil, we don't really do that. A cucumber, which is real expensive. I said 8 earlier. I think it's just 1 denarius. Can you imagine spending 1 day's wage for a cucumber? Okay. Like I say, I misspoke earlier. So 1 denarius, 2 to 4 denarius for a newborn donkey. Clothing, 4 denarii lamb, 8 denarii ram, 12 to 20 denarii shawl, 20 denarii calf. Now, I don't know, anybody here farmers, how much would you pay for a calf? Anybody? I came out with $870. I don't know if that's equivalent or not. It's high. We'd pay more than that today for a calf. Or you think this number's high?
For premium stock, you could pay that.
Okay. All right. So I didn't know how that really equates today. Yeah. An ox, we don't really buy a lot of ox. High priest garments, we don't really have those around very much anymore. And I told you we're going to do a Bible calculator, BibleCalculators.com, and I plan to put some of this information on there as well as we go. All right, so we can compare some things to other things, some things we cannot. How does the Roman work year compare to ours? Well, before the late Roman Republic, early Empire, the Roman work week was 8 days, 7 days of work, 1 day of rest, 365 days per year, gets 45 weeks. That multiplied by 42 hours per week, which is 6 hours per day times 7 days per week, gives 1,900 hours a year, which is not far off from our 2,080 hours that we work today. Okay, if you work a 40-hour week and work 52 weeks, you come up with 2,080. Of course, you get time off, paid vacation, holidays, that kind of thing. All right. Therefore, the Romans only worked about 92% of what we work, and they had many more days off because they had a lot of feasts and holidays and that kind of thing. All right. So what was a Roman soldier paid? So the base pay during different periods in the late Republic. After the Marian reforms, we're going to talk about that probably next week or maybe the next week. We'll talk about what those mean. Around 100 BC, pay for a legionary was about 5 asses per day or about 75 denarii per year. Under Augustus, the standard annual pay for a legionary was 225 denarii, and then it went up to 300 denarii under Domitian. Okay, and then we see pay for others. Auxiliary infantrymen received a little bit less. Praetorian guards received more because they were pretty important. Officers and specialists were paid more. I mean, you could make pretty good money if you were an officer in the Roman military. That's why so many people joined the Roman military. So deductions were made for food, equipment, etc., so you didn't get to take home much. So based on this, they earn between 225 and 300 denarii a year. And if we do that, we come up with $97.88 per year. Okay. If we use 300 denarii, we get $13,000. Okay. And if we use our minimum wage worker working 7.25 per hour times 1,900 hours, we get $13,893. Okay, so this is just another kind of check mark that says, well, this analysis might be pretty good after all. Okay, now I was thinking then about a Roman soldier. How many Roman soldiers work 6 hours a day? Probably not many. Okay, so I started thinking about maybe another way to calculate this. Let's say they work twice that. Let's say they work 12-hour days, which is probably pretty reasonable. But let's say they only got paid a denarius a day still. Okay, but let's say also that maybe the inflation had taken hold by that point, and they were really the de facto minimum wage is really $13 an hour, like it is today. I calculated that out. I get $12,500. Okay, again, just another kind of little check mark to kind of show generally that we're in the ballpark, I think. Numerous money conversions in the Bible. Okay, I've already talked about some of these. A denarius was a day's wage for a labor. A denarius was equal to 64 quadrans. A quadran was equal to 2 leptons. A lepton is equal to half a quadrans, which is kind of saying the same thing. A dram was equal to a denarius. A digram was equal to 2 drams. A drachma. Stater, 4 drachma. Shekel, 2 denarii. A talent, 60 minas. A mina, 100 drachma. And an aureus was 25 denarii. So you can go to those particular passages and see where all that's talked about in the Bible. So I boiled it down to just this: conversion among monetary systems. A Jewish lepton, which is a small piece, the smallest piece of money that was available anywhere, was 128th of a denarius, 128th of a Greek dram, or a 5/12 of a Jewish shekel. And this turns out to be 34 cents based on the 2016 minimum wage. 1 Roman denarius is about equal to a Greek dram, which is about a quarter of a Jewish shekel, which is $43.50. And a Jewish shekel, Tyrian shekel, is worth about $174. Okay. Jewish talent, which is 10,000 Roman denarii or 10,000 Greek drachma, was $522,000. And we see that expressed in the parable of talents. We see through the history, we've seen several examples of where emperors and whoever would come and take money from the treasury, from the temple, and they would steal talents upon talents. So that gives kind of an idea of how much money they were taking when they did that. Okay. Some notes on coin composition. Brass is an alloy of copper and zinc. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. Another term occasionally used in ancient literature is, I can't pronounce it, which was likely a bronze alloy, which resembled golden color, used for the sestertius and the dupondius. Different metals are denoted by the abbreviations AE, AR, and AU. So if you go out and buy coins like I do, and again, you can buy almost anything online, but you have to be careful and make sure they're legitimate. But AE denotes a base metal, like a brass or bronze coin. Okay, so you'll see that in the description, AE dupondius or whatever, AE lepta. Numbers following the A denote the size. For Greek coins, it's millimeters. For Roman coins, you have AE1 that are large coins and AE4 that are very small coins, and it's from the Latin word AES. AR coins are silver, from argentum, the Latin term for silver. And the periodic table, it's AG, which is also from the Latin term argentum. Okay. AU are gold coins. These are the ones you're going to get me for Christmas. Okay. Denotes that a coin is gold from aurum, the Latin term for gold, and AU is the representation in the periodic table for gold. All right. Some philosophy. Okay. Now, I've actually seen a couple of these guys in conferences and stuff. So George Gilder, I did see, really smart guy. He's about 150 years old, but he's still an amazing mind. He's the one that presented the first microchip or a microchip to Ronald Reagan back in the days before Ronald Reagan came up with the idea of Star Wars. Okay. He said, this thing is really gonna do some cool stuff. Okay. So George Gilder said this. He said, what matters is not how much money you're paid. Doesn't matter at all. But how many hours you have to work to get it, right? What matters is not money prices, manipulated by central banks and adjusted by consumer price indexes, but time prices. And this is something I've looked into quite a bit. It's kind of an interesting topic to me. Time prices measure how many hours and minutes you have to work to pay them. Since 1981, time prices across the world economy have been dropping 3.4% a year. So we're all worked up about inflation, okay? But stuff's getting cheaper. Some stuff's getting cheaper. This computer, it's a lot cheaper when I bought it a few months ago, about a year ago, to what they would be 10 years ago, right? You couldn't even get something like this 10 years ago, as powerful as this is, okay? So he's saying that your time prices are deflating by 3.4% a year. Tom Sowell said the Neanderthal in his cave had all the same natural resources we do. What distinguishes our age from the Stone Age is entirely the growth of knowledge. That's another time price concept. If I take a contemporary term, if I take a Tesla Plaid, okay, that's the high-end Tesla car, okay, and I take it and I run it 100 miles an hour down the road and I run it to a block wall. How much is that, I don't know, $120,000 car worth after I run it to a block wall? Not very much. You cart it off to the dump, right? But what that Plaid represents before it's wrecked is the accumulation of human knowledge, okay? Time prices. Again, another interesting concept to me. Maybe it is to you, I don't know. Byron King, who I've also seen in a conference, and I'm actually going to a conference in October. I'm going to actually meet him this time instead of just sitting out in the audience. I'm going to go up and meet him, I think. He says out of the 92 elements in his iPhone, similar for an Android phone if you have it, out of the 92 elements in the periodic table, 63 of them are inside my Apple product, okay? Victor Davis Hanson, society does not always collapse from a lack of wealth, invasion, or natural catastrophes. Most often, they know about it is destroying them, but they are so paralyzed by their fear that the road to salvation becomes too painful to even contemplate. Wow, that sound like the U.S.? So they implode gradually, then suddenly. That's what happened to Rome. They were debasing their currency. A lot of things happened to Rome. If you look at the fall of the Roman Empire, there's so many different things that caused them to fall. One thing was the debasement of their currency. Warren Buffett said, I can end the deficit in 5 minutes. You just pass a law that says anytime there's a deficit of more than 3% of GDP, all sitting members of Congress are ineligible for re-election. Okay, that would fix the thing. All right. 4 seconds early.
4 seconds.